So let me introduce our speakers. This I mentioned earlier, this is the 6th year that we are co-sponsoring this lecture with Preservation Chicago. The last couple of years we were sold out in our lecture hall, and we made plans to do it at a church this year because we figured there'll be room for 200 people. And I just checked our numbers and we're almost 500 people right now. So this is a blessing of doing a virtual program. So we're honored to provide this format for the release of their annual listing of Chicago's most endangered buildings, architecturally significant buildings that must be saved. And believe it or not, this is the 19th year that Preservation Chicago has put this list together. So our speaker today is Ward Miller, and I imagine he's not a stranger to most of you. He's the executive director of Preservation Chicago since 2013. 65. And he was also the founding board member. He has dedicated his life to preserving Chicago's historic buildings. He was the executive director of the Richard Nickel Committee, where he co-authored the 2010 publication, The Complete Architecture of Adler and Sullivan. He spent 2 decades on the Issues Committee of Landmarks, Illinois, and vice president of Logan Square Preservation for 15 years. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Ward.
Thank you so much. Thank you, and welcome everyone. As Hallie mentioned, I'm Ward Miller. I'm Executive Director of Preservation Chicago, and we are honored to have all of you here today. It's a sold-out audience. We had over 1,000 reservations for our event today, and we're humbled by that. And we want to thank you at Chicago Architecture Center, our partner nonprofit organization, for hosting us again for this important event. And it's just unfortunate we can't all be together in person, but want to thank you and the staff at Chicago Architecture Foundation, and specifically Lynn Osmond, CEO and president of the Chicago Architecture Foundation, Michael Wood, Hallie Rosen, who you've all been listening to, Ian Spula, and the entire staff at the CAC, including Casey Crail, Ryan McCreary, William Berthow, and thank you for joining us, all of you. You know, we couldn't do this important work in what we do here in Chicago to support preservation and to spotlight these buildings and to do our advocacy work without the important support of our funders. And those funders are the Richard H. Driehaus Foundation, the Alphawood Foundation Chicago, the Mary Ellen De Matteo Foundation, the Reva and David Logan Foundation, the Tawani Foundation, the Arthur C. Nielsen Jr. Family Charitable Trust, the Lake Effect Fund, the Fishman Family Fund, and Susan Hurst and Susan Lawrence. So thank all of you for your support of Preservation Chicago and our advocacy work to preserve Chicago's built environment and our landmarks. The photographs that you'll see today were provided by an amazing group of photographers, including Eric Rogers, Sergei Krutsky, Debbie Mercer, Mary Lou Seidel, and Max Chavez. And so we begin today's presentation with a poster. Many of you know, we have a poster designed each year as our cover for our Chicago 7. And this is really spectacular. It's by Steve Shannonbrook. He has designed many of our posters in the past, and very proud to share this year's Chicago 7 with all of you. We're just having a little technical difficulty here.
I got to unmute myself. If you just click on your PowerPoint, it should start. Yeah.
There we go. Fabulous. Thank you so much. Anyway, we're good to go here. So, you know, one thing that we just wanted to mention is that these are some of our Chicago 7 most endangered candidates since 2003. And it includes just a whole list of great buildings from Chicago Union Station and Cook County Hospital to Lathrop Homes, Metropolitan Church, and Rosenwald Apartments, and the list goes on. And these were not done exclusively. They were not saved exclusively through our advocacy, but we were very much involved in the effort, sometimes starting the effort. And of course, this takes a village to make this happen, but some wonderful, wonderful buildings that are part of our everyday lives that really impact us in a positive way. And so we wanted to share those with you. Our first category is the Chicago Lakefront by Olmsted and Vaugh, Nelson, Simmons, Burnham, Atwood, Bennett, and others. And this is really an amazing resource. This is Chicago's front yard, if you will, and was founded with a principle in 1836, forever open, free, and clear. And we really think that that's an important aspect of our Chicago lakefront. It frames our downtown. It gives us breathable space. It protects us from those sort of rough days on Lake Michigan, the built environment. And it's really a spectacular attribute to Chicago that really makes our city special. But we continuously see issues with, if you will, giveaways of parklands, privatization of parklands and programs. And we really think this is not a good place to be. And then we're also watching things happen, but we're not watching silently. We're actively campaigning to address some of these issues and to make them better. So to share this idea with you, we're starting off with the North Lakeshore Drive reconstruction project. And this is a revisioning of Lakeshore Drive as we know it, but it would actually perhaps increase the parkland and the width of the drive with on and off ramps, tunnels. There's a tunnel proposed from the space between Navy Pier and Oak Street Beach. And this would create sort of an effect like you were on the Eisenhower Expressway, Dan Ryan, or parts of the Kennedy, where you're sort of in a dry riverbed. And all these components, like these bridges that add so much to the Lakeshore Drive experience, a boulevard, if you will, is what it really is so important. And to remove these bridges and to reduce the vistas that you get as you come around these bends and across these bridges, these historic bridges, and components, to lose these would be tragic in a straightening out of Lakeshore Drive. And every time we've touched Lakeshore Drive, remember, it's become, whether it's at McCormick Place or whether it's at the S curve, we run into problems where we suddenly rebuild these things to highway standards instead of thinking of them as a pastoral boulevard. And I think that's really important to remember. All the kinks, the curves, the certain features of Lakeshore Drive are so important to retain, from the south end and near Jackson Park for the proposed Obama Center to the end at Hollywood. So this whole stretch. Also important is Promontory Point, where we have these revetments, these limestone blocks that are historic to this amazing park. This is one of Alfred Caldwell's great accomplishments here. We've seen so much of the lakefront revetments replaced with concrete steps, and it doesn't have the same quality. And this is everybody's front yard. So it's so important to maintain these special features, to spend the extra money to make this all happen and make sure that these lands are protected and free and clear for all. And that open, free, and clear should extend not only just to Grant Park and maybe parts of Burnham Park, but it really should be from Hollywood all the way down to the steel mills, the former steel mill sites in South Chicago. We also have an issue in Jackson Park, and this has been talked about in a Chicago 7 for many years before, the impact of the Obama Presidential Center in a legacy Chicago park, a lakefront park. And we very much welcome the Obama Presidential Center to Chicago and to Chicago's South Side, but we really would prefer it be moved out of a park, especially in Olmsted and Vaugh Park that's on the lakefront. And we have several proposed sites versus being built in Jackson Park. But you can see from this photograph that so much of Jackson Park, probably in the range of about 40%, is water and lagoons and harbors and whatnot. And we need to be very careful. These are also watershed lands. These are former marshlands turned into parks by Olmsted and Vaugh and others. and May McAdams. And it's really a special park. It was considered one of Chicago's premier parks. When I was growing up, it was considered the best, the very best of the best. So we're very concerned about the impacts of a 230-foot building and several ancillary buildings to Jackson Park and the Chicago lakefront. And of course, in the meantime, we see buildings that continue to collapse on the lakefront. This is the Daniel Burnham designed Comfort Station on South Lakeshore Drive near 67th Street. And it's had numerous collapses and it's been fenced off, as you can see. We have other buildings, smaller buildings than this. Some are even larger that have holes in the roofs, are lacking a roof. And we think this is really, really important to remember. We also get to the South Shore Cultural Center Nature Sanctuary, where there's a proposed combining of the Jackson Park golf course with the South Shore Cultural Center golf course. And that would remove this nature center, this South Shore Nature Sanctuary. And you can see it here in the foreground. And it's a lovely place. And it's worth, if you haven't been there, it's worth visiting. And you know, this is going to be a golf tee hole, if you will, a green, if you will, because it has the most fabulous views of downtown. And what are we losing? What are we replacing this with? And is it worth it? And why aren't we building golf courses elsewhere? Why, instead of combining two into one, why not build a wholly new golf course, maybe on the former steel mill site in South Chicago, adjoining the lakefront, which is currently a brownfield? Let's make it a green field and a green park. And this is that site. And you can see how tremendously large this is. And the views of downtown are fabulous. And wouldn't it be great to rethink this as a lakefront park? If you want to put your golf course here, I think this is a fine place to integrate it. And if you wanted to do some residential development to the west, that would be fine too. But really, this should all be open, free, and clear and part of the lakefront trail. And just some other pictures of this incredible site. This is a great opportunity for Chicago to rise to the occasion. We also want to suggest that Chicago consider the lakefront here as a national park, very much like the Pullman National Monument inside our city in the Pullman district, and also like the Indiana Dunes. And we think this would be a shared maintenance with the city of Chicago and the National Park Service and the Chicago Park District. And this could alleviate some of the funds required to repair so many of these trails and buildings and components of our lakefront. So we'd really like to see the National Park Service as a partner in this, and perhaps this would stop the various land giveaways that have happened over time. It would take some of the politics out of the park, if you will, and really give this whole parkland to all of Chicago, forever open, free, and clear since 1836. Part of this idea is to take the Lakeside Center, formerly the original McCormick Place, which was an amazing structure. It was the world's largest convention hall. Its proportions are amazing. It was compared to the Sears Tower and the John Hancock Building for its structural innovations and for its space frame. That's really a design that came out of the studios and offices affiliated with Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. And it's really a fabulous building on an amazing proportion and scale. As you can see here, we think that this could be part of the Lakefront Trail and be perhaps Chicago's great Mid-South Bronzeville cultural center and field house to have running tracks, to have swimming pools in this building, to have tennis courts, basketball courts throughout the building, within its base, within its roof, on its high platform. And we think this could be an amazing idea that could happen perhaps if we had the National Park Service and those additional funds in here. The top of this building the roof is 3 football fields long, and it's really an amazing structure. This could be self-powered with solar panels as well. Our next category is the Phyllis Wheatley House from 1896 by Frederick Townsend. This is an amazing structure that was built in 1896, but its architecture, doesn't hold a candle to its history. This was considered a safe house and a place for women of color immigrating from the South to Chicago that couldn't stay or couldn't find a place with family or friends. And places like the YWCA and other institutions were not open to women of color. And this is a striking building that was formed by a club called the Phyllis Wheatley Club, established in Chicago in 1895 by Elizabeth Lindsay Davis and a group of very prominent African Americans, and named in honor of Phyllis Wheatley, a 17th century poet, a published poet, by the way, of color, a Black woman who was actually enslaved. She was kidnapped in Africa, enslaved by a family in Boston, and was published in England, and was one of America's first published women, if you will. So an amazing structure at 5128 South Michigan Avenue, and this building is in danger. It's in critical danger. We have a court date established for March 16th, in which the judge could rule this unsafe. But we really want to see the city of Chicago step up, work with the courts, work with the current owners who have owned it for quite a number of years, decades actually, and really see this as an amazing resource for the Bronzeville community. Landmark it, invest Southwest monies, and perhaps adopt the landmark monies in this building, and work with institutions and the owner's personal 501c3 nonprofit organization towards a good outcome for this amazing building. And here is an image of Phyllis Wheatley in a front piece of her book that was published. You know, really an amazing woman, an amazing story, amazing series of accomplishments. And remember that women's landmarks have not been celebrated at the same level as our other landmarks. And we've seen numbers of these demolished. And when you look at African-American women's landmarks tied to African-American women, it becomes the rarest of the rare. So it's so important to save these buildings and to save this individual building, recognize its great history, and landmark it. This should be a building for all Chicagoans. Our next category is the Cornell Store and Flats. This is by Walter Burley Griffin from 1908. It's an amazing structure on what was a busy 75th Street commercial district at one time. It has two elevations. It has this elevation you see here, and another elevation on its north face, which is its residential side. But Walter Burley Griffin was an amazing architect, and he worked with Frank Lloyd Wright. Actually, he met his wife, Marion Mahoney Griffin, at Frank Lloyd Wright's studio. And he went on to design the capital city of Canberra, Australia. He won this amazing international competition. And here's a building on 75th Street, right where the viaduct, the embankment, and the Metro Electric, originally the Illinois Central tracks, all meet. And a picture of the storefront before it was remodeled, but it's still very much intact, as you can see here. But a building that really needs to be celebrated, should be landmarked, and should be a priority for Chicago. As you can see on both sides of this building are vacant parcels where you could actually combine this with a larger development, really celebrate this building. And we're excited about the possibilities, but it does remain in terrible condition, and we really need to address this quickly. This is the residential side. This is the north side of the building. And you really do see the power of Griffin and that Prairie School movement coming through in these beautiful piers that are massive, that extend from the ground all the way up to the roof line. And then there's this large reveal at the roof line, so the roof appears to float. And you can really see the right influences here. But this is, you know, by a world-class architect. And this is a building we need to save. And this is its condition right now. And of course, we really think that this needs to be addressed sooner rather than later, and really welcome ideas that could even tie it into a transit center as it abuts the Illinois Central Metro Electric tracks at 75th Street. This is actually a flag stop on that line. Our next Chicago 7 is the South Chicago Masonic Temple by Clarence Hatsfield of 1916. This is an amazing structure on 91st Street, once a commercial corridor in the South Chicago neighborhood. that's been so impacted by plant closings, by the steel mills closing, and really a loss of population. But as you can see, a really remarkable building and a neighborhood that really needs to be a focus of our plans in Chicago, our future plans. Here's the sort of colonnade, if you will, along the Exchange Avenue side, a really remarkable building that sits abandoned. For a while, it was a temporary home of the Chicago Public Library. And this is a first-class building. And these are the buildings we need to recognize in our neighborhoods across the city and landmark and reinvest in. And you know, Preservation Chicago welcomes development, but we welcome sensitive development and development that invests in our landmarks and development that creates better communities and is a holistic approach to growing a better Chicago. So here it is across the street from another great building that's also empty. This is the former St. Peter and Paul Church and School. It's Art Moderne in style, Art Deco, Art Moderne. A beautiful combination church and school building, all in one structure. This is currently owned by a local health clinic, but we'd like to see this building recognized, landmarked, and reinvested in. Our next category is the Central Manufacturing District. This is the original East District. It's by a series of architects, Alfred Altschuler, who brought us the London Guarantee Building, numerous great factory and industrial buildings, Postel and Mahler, Samuel Scott Joy, and others. And Samuel Scott Joy, and this was from 1905 to 1959, 1960. This is an amazing group of buildings that concentrated manufacturing and industry all into one vision and one idea, one complex, beginning in 1902. And it was really phenomenal. It tied together transportation, networking, all sorts of facilities, a switchboard, food service and whatnot. Really an amazing series of buildings. And as you may remember, last year we had the Central Manufacturing District Pershing Road district on our Chicago 7 list. Those are those red brick buildings that head down Pershing Road or 39th Street. But this is really an amazing series of buildings that has been neglected, and one by one, they're being demolished. We recently lost the Larkin factory building related to the Larkin building in New York, in Buffalo, New York, and also the Wrigley factory that fronted Ashland Avenue. So really, really great losses here. And we want to see these remaining buildings landmarked. And you can see the great quality and the diversity and the architecture and the expression of these buildings is really phenomenal. The details are remarkable. And they're employing new construction techniques that were really new ideas back when these were built. So we really want to see this original East District, which is now a National Register District, thanks in parts to us and at Preservation Chicago and our partner organization, Landmarks Illinois, that was fulfilled obligation a number of years ago. And then just to kind of give you a little idea of the quality of these doorways, the image on the left, you can see it sort of faintly, it says the Walgreen Company. So, you know, a number of these buildings are of great importance. This is Altschuler's standard sanitary company building on Iron Street. A beautiful detail. Our next category are Chicago Loop Industrial Lofts by First and Rudolph, Flanders and Zimmerman, a very well-noted architecture firm, and Henry Schlacks, who was known for his ecclesiastical architecture and buildings, including many of our Chicago churches. And the first one is the ADM mill, if you will. This was built in 1891 by Flanders and Zimmerman, and it's along Carroll Street as you get near Ogden Avenue. And we were hoping this building would be integrated into a new development, including its concrete silos. And we had met with the developer about 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. And we're really hoping for a preservation solution. Unfortunately, portions of this building are currently in demolition. And these structures are really amazing. There was one point where we thought this should have been part of the Fulton Market, the Fulton Randolph Market Landmark District, with these amazing silos. This is the oldest flour mill in Chicago that still remains, and remarkable in every way. And then we have the Cassidy Tire building that was built originally as the Tyler and Hippick Glass Company building. And this building was actually moved in its early years. It's by Henry Schlacks. And I think you can see the Chicago School vocabulary coming through here. These incredible structures. This is on Wolf Point, where Chicago began, the village of Chicago began. And as you can see, it's surrounded by these tall towers. And you can really see the incredible fenestration and power of this building in this detail image, where you're really seeing those great attributes of the Chicago School of Architecture come out. And yet it's a factory building, and it's located just outside the loop. And we'd like to see this building integrated into the larger development that is proposed for this site, rather than losing this whole building. Our next candidate in that same category, this is the Salvation Army building that was built in the 1890s and was remodeled in the 1940s with this incredible Art Deco, Art Moderne entry and joining of structures, loft structures. And this building is currently for sale, and we'd very much like to see this building saved as well. Our last category are the Roman Catholic churches of Chicago. And these are by a who's who of great architects, from Henry Schlacks to William Brinkman, to Joseph Molitor, Worthman and Steinbach, and Joe McCarthy and others. And we date this from the 1850s to 1963. We've just selected 12 of them to share with you today. The first one is St. Michael the Archangel. This is built in 1909 by William Brinkman. It's at 83rd and South Shore Drive in Chicago. And it's an amazing structure, especially with seeing it from these various perspectives, whether it's from the Skyway Bridge or from the extension of Lakeshore Drive. This really does look like a cathedral on the prairie. And it's just such a tragedy to think that these buildings that were built by the faithful and the communities that surround them with pennies, nickels, and dimes, and giving them oftentimes to the Archdiocese of Chicago to staff, steward, and maintain. It's really tragic to see these close, as they are a great resource to the neighborhood. They're cornerstones of their neighborhood. And they're also food pantries offering social services and all sorts of things. And when these churches and these buildings close, a lot goes with them. And oftentimes they're the last resource in the neighborhood. And we should be thinking better of how we handle these. We shouldn't be selling them at top dollar. We should be giving them away. We should be finding new uses for them if the religious idea and that decision is made to stop that religious parish from using this building. It's so important to maintain these buildings. So this is Our Lady of Peace on Jeffrey Boulevard in the South Shore neighborhood. And a great interior. This was known as the Blue Church of Chicago. Really, really fabulous. This one closed I'd like to say about a year and a half, 2 years ago. This is St. Anthony's, All Saints St. Anthony's Parish. This is by Schlacks as well, Henry Schlacks. Henry Schlacks, by the way, worked in the offices of Adler and Sullivan, Dankmar Adler and Louis Sullivan. So the loss of these buildings, the potential loss, is tremendous. And we really think the city needs to, and as you look at, by the way, if you look at this beautiful mosaic detail and you look at the stone carvings, I think you can see a little bit of Dankmar Adler and especially Louis Sullivan's designs coming out in these doorway surrounds. But really, these buildings should be considered for Chicago landmark designation as a thematic grouping. And right now, we need the consent of the Archdiocese or the owner of any church to landmark it. And that's a law that we need to repeal. It was brought about in 1987 to protect Fourth Presbyterian Church on Michigan Avenue that wanted to build a high-rise behind their building and demolish part of their complex. Anyway, I think we need to revisit these laws and these rules and regulations. these buildings belong to all of us collectively. They were built by us collectively, and it's really a tragedy when you see these lost. This is Our Lady of Victory on Chicago's northwest side in Jefferson Park, an amazing structure tied to a group of architects built over a series of decades, actually. And you can see it's got this incredible sanctuary, and it also has a lower chapel that's equally beautifully detailed. But what a wonderful space. And the thought of losing these spaces and losing these buildings is really tragic. And then buildings like St. Ignatius. This is in Rogers Park. It's also by Henry Schlacks, a fabulous church, and very much in the spirit of some of the other Henry Schlacks churches that we've seen in the past, including St. Adalbert's in Pilsen, or St. Adalbert's if you're outside of Pilsen, as it's known as. And we really want to see the city who promised a commitment to landmark that building to come through with that commitment. You know, these buildings can also be chapels. They do not have to be a parish, a traditional parish. They can be open 24 hours a day, or even for a limited amount of time as a place of refuge, a place of contemplation, a place of prayer. They're really beautiful spaces and oftentimes anchor neighborhoods. This is St. Matthias in the Lincoln Square neighborhood. You know, another fabulous church by Henry Gall. And, you know, this is another one where the school is to remain open because it's so successful, yet the church is closing and being merged. So we have over 88 of these buildings and churches and parishes all merging as part of an archdiocesan plan, with 25 of them closed or for sale. And we think that we can do better. Here is Our Lady of Lourdes on Ashland Avenue in the Lincoln Square neighborhood. It has 975 members from countries around the world. It's a very, very diverse church. And yet it's on a closure list or a merger list, shall we say. And it's kind of on a probation where annually things will be reassessed. But we were very much involved in the discussions here on efforts to save Our Lady of Lourdes. Here's an interior of it. It also contains an adjacent chapel, which is very much like a copy, if you will, of the Lourdes, Our Lady of Lourdes sacred site in Lourdes, France, which is open 24 hours a day. That was also a church that was moved across the street in the 1920s. It was cut in half and expanded. So, you know, an amazing building, and its domes and its towers are seen throughout the neighborhood. The same is true here with the Holy Cross Church in the back of the Yards neighborhood. Just these fabulous, fabulous towers that loom over the community and are really landmarks. These are really our landmarks of our city. These should be recognized and honored and designated. And then lastly, again, this is just a small sampling of the larger category of the 88 churches that are being merged, consolidated, closed, deconsecrated, and or sold. This is St. George on the east side, which is a section of the far east side of the city, joining the South Chicago neighborhood, and a remarkable church also by William Brinkman. And look at even the backside of this church with its beautiful clay tile roofs, the sun hitting this common brick that's of the side and rear elevations. Really a remarkable church. All of these are. And then, you know, I suppose some of you will think to yourselves, well, what about those Chicago Sevens from years past? And we want to offer that once a Chicago Seven, always a Chicago Seven in our book, and we will help these buildings along until they are renovated, restored, or we won't go there. But you know, some of our previous Chicago Sevens that we hope will be our Chicago Seven stars in the future, the graduates, if you will, of our program here, to highlight and spotlight all these buildings from the Thompson Center and Roseland, South Michigan Avenue, to the Union Station Powerhouse, which is now under threat of demolition by Amtrak, who's spending millions of dollars restoring old Chicago Union Station, which has turned out beautifully, but here spending $13 million of taxpayer money to demolish this building instead of reusing it. and of course the Pershing Road CMD, Central Manufacturing District from last year. But also to include Gertrude Curbis's Rotunda building at O'Hare Airport to make sure and ensure that that remains, and to honor it with a landmark designation, as well as the Laramie State Bank, the Second Church of Christ Scientist by Beeman, which is under threat of demolition, with the exception of its outside walls for a mid-rise development. The Lou Hammer, the Hammer and Lou Palmer and Jorah Palmer Mansion on King Drive should definitely be saved, should be part of not only an individual landmark, but a landmark district, as well as the Hotel Guyan, which is in the West Garfield Park neighborhood and stands vacant for more than a decade. These are tragedies, if you will. And in a city that needs housing, we should be reinventing and reinvesting in these buildings, from Loretto Academy to the Hotel Guyan and others. And then just to remind you of some of our others, our other Chicago 7s that are still languishing. We have the Washington Park Substation, the closed public schools. Remember, there were 49 of them that closed a few years ago. Well, we're down to about 20 that still remain vacant, and these would be great ideal housing for moderate, low-income housing, affordable housing. These are amazing structures. Their gymnasiums could be used as community centers. We could have food service in these kitchens and cafeterias, and we could really address some of our big needs in Chicago by reinventing and rethinking some of these public schools that were closed about 5 years ago. And then, of course, the 20th century Chicago sculpture category. We've lost this one, apparently, the Calder and the Sears Tower. It's in storage, and hoping that maybe one day that could remain in Chicago and go to the Art Institute, which would welcome it. We've made those connections, and we've been told that they would welcome it and make a special place for it. We have a video that we wanted to share with you, just a recap of things. This is by one of our great filmmakers. This is Teddy Holcomb, who designed this for us this year with photographs from our esteemed group of Chicago photographers. Yeah, here's McCormick Place, and you can see how large that building is, and what a great asset it would be to Chicago's lakefront. And the Phyllis Wheatley home. This really needs a good steward, and the current owner is willing to work with the city and stakeholders and organizations across the country towards a good resolution. The Cornell Store and Flats by Walter Burley Griffin, one of the great Prairie School architects, and a building in total disrepair that really needs another good steward to make sure that this building isn't lost to demolition. And the South Chicago Masonic Temple. A really amazing building that, you know, if it was repurposed, could be a real economic driver for South Chicago in this strip of 91st Street and Exchange. A really remarkable building that we've just sort of collectively let fall into disrepair. And of course, the Central Manufacturing District, covering several neighborhoods and several aldermanic districts. And what a loss this would be to lose these structures. We're seeing them demolished for strip malls, for heaven's sakes. Haven't we outlawed those in Chicago yet? This is a city of architecture. And if we want to really be serious about our architecture and our architectural heritage and growing tourism, we need to invest in these neighborhoods. We need to invest in these buildings. We need to do a lot more, and I think we can. So this whole idea in this presentation is to encourage developers, stakeholders, city officials, all of us as community members to work together towards good solutions to save these buildings and figure out how we can repurpose them, how they can help us refashion and grow holistic neighborhoods across the city. And then, of course, our Roman Catholic churches of Chicago that are really cornerstones of so many neighborhoods and will be closed in droves. And we need to really think of how we can reuse these buildings. There are currently 19 challenges in the Vatican courts by people in the preservation world that want to see these buildings remain religious properties. And I want to take a minute, one more minute, to thank our amazing Preservation Chicago staff who worked tirelessly to make this presentation a reality today. And especially Adam Nathanson, our Director of Operations, Kathy Bond, Director of Events, who worked with Hallie and the Chicago Architecture Foundation to make this day with all of you a reality. Also, Mary Lou Seidel, our Director of Community Engagement at Preservation Chicago, and our Mildred Kolodny Diversity Scholar from the National Trust, Max Chavez. We've all worked extremely hard to bring this all together and to bring it to you today. And thank you so much for being a part of our big announcement. We look forward to all of you participating. If you can, we have a free newsletter that's available. We have, it comes out, it's called the Month in Review. It comes out the week after the month is over. So it spills into the next month, captures all the news of the previous month. And if you go to our website, www.preservationchicago.org, you can sign up for that free newsletter. It's really a great resource. And thank you all for being here today.
Don't go anywhere, everyone, because I want to invite Mary Lou Seidel, the Director of Community Engagement from Preservation Chicago, to come on, and Ward is going to answer some of your questions. And yes. Mary Lou is going to ask them.
Great. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
And I apologize. We do have our office right next to the L track. So if you hear a large train going by, you're not losing your mind. Ward, one of the first questions comes from Joshua. And he had thought that the Washington Park National Bank was a lost cause. Do you want to just talk about how things aren't lost until they're, it ain't over till it's over?
Yeah, thank you, Mary Lou. Thank you, Josh. Yes, the Washington Park National Bank is still the property, to our knowledge, of the Cook County Land Bank. And we really feel that this is an amazing structure that could be tied to the end of the L line there at 63rd and Cottage, and could be integrated into the library that stands right to the west of it, adjacent to it, and some open lands that are nearby to the south of it. And this could really be a reinvigoration of that 63rd Street and Cottage hub that was really a heart to the entertainment district on the south side. So much has been lost. The Tivoli Theater, other structures where we have so many missing gaps and vacant parcels. And we really do think that this building could be part of a bigger development on that site. A great majority of the site is the 2.5-story banking room, which has fallen into the most disrepair. So you could almost insert a new building into that, where that banking room stood, if that was so desired, and really keep the 20-foot bays that surround the three sides of the building intact, their concrete construction, and really almost hold that complete facade in place as an idea. Of course, there are many different clever ideas for this building and this site, but it would really be a great new renaissance for West Woodlawn and the greater Woodlawn community if this structure were saved and repurposed. Why another vacant lot? It's just unnecessary.
Thanks, Ward. And we have about 17 questions, so we're going to try and get through these. How is the McCormick Place building currently being used?
So
The
it's now,
Lakeside Center. Sorry.
right, it's now called the Lakeside Center at McCormick Place. At one time it was McCormick Place, right? The world's largest convention center. It's used a few times a year. We're told pre-COVID there were about 3 or 4 conventions a year that used its primary glass halls, if you will, which are at the same grade as the bridge. But you know, Erie Crown Theater really hasn't been as active as it used to be when I was growing up in Chicago. And you know, this would be a great opportunity to rethink this building as an extension of the lakefront and the lakefront trail, and have so many activities in here that you could walk to, you could bike to, you could drive to, because there's a parking structure in the base. And it could really be a cultural center and field house, perhaps the world's largest field house. That would be really exciting for Chicago to have, especially in a landmark structure as this building is. The other McCormick Places, the other buildings don't hold a candle to this one. This one's architecturally significant and engineering wise, so significant on so many levels.
Thanks, Ward. I am just going to answer a question that is repeatedly being asked. This is being recorded, and we will be posting it. Preservation Chicago will be posting it to our YouTube channel and our Facebook page by Monday at the very latest. Thanks. Here is a question from Barry. Same problems we have all around the world. Landmark status is great, but how can we work to reposition these wonderful buildings, our history within our new cities? Any tools or ideas you might share to get that done? Thanks.
Sure. So thank you for that question. You know, in Chicago, if you are a landmark building or part of a landmark district, you can oftentimes apply. It's a competitive process for Adopt the Landmark monies, which are up to about $250,000 for most buildings. Let's just say that's been awarded to a number of religious buildings already. And then if you're a special condition like the Uptown Theater, there's a $3 million commitment dedicated to that, you know, Herculean, but very special and worthy landmark. So, you know, these funds are available, and they're not coming from the city general fund. These are developer funds. Developers pay into this fund to get additional FAR, or if you will, floor area ratio and height. So it's a special fund that is really amazing. Part of it goes into the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund. A small percentage of it, 10%, goes into the Adopt the Landmark Fund. So it'd be great to use these ideas, and then also lean on our amazing and wonderful Chicago-based foundations and those elsewhere, the philanthropic foundations, to work with city agencies to make this happen. And we have so many of them in Chicago, and they really want to help. So let's all work together towards these goals.
Great, thank you, Ward. An attendee wanted you to talk a little bit more about the 1987 amendment to the landmark ordinance, which exempts churches. Thanks.
Sure. So in 1987, the very beautiful Fourth Presbyterian Church on North Michigan Avenue across from the Hancock Building wanted to add a little more value to their land and a little more income with the idea of a tall high-rise building, residential high-rise, going up behind their church. So there were a number of Gothic-inspired buildings by Ralph Adam Cram and Bertrand Goodhue that are part of that complex on North Michigan Avenue. And they were demolished. They did not want to seek landmark designation because that could prevent them from doing that. And ultimately, the city stepped in under Alderman Nateris, who proposed an ordinance that religious buildings, if they hold services, are exempt from the landmarks, without the permission of the ownership. So oftentimes these days, we seek the permission of the owner to designate these buildings, but it's really hamstrung us over time. And remember, these buildings were built by the communities. They were built by the faithful of those communities, and they were given to these entities, in this case, the Archdiocese of Chicago, to maintain, to staff, and steward. And we've lost quite a few of them over time. Over 100 of these have been closed or consolidated, and over 50 of them have been demolished. since Chicago was founded, if you will. That goes back a ways, but it's still resources and community cornerstones and gateways that we're losing left and right. So if we repeal this ordinance, churches and temples and synagogues, religious buildings would be on par, on the same level playing field as any other building in the city that could qualify for landmark designation. It would fit to two of those 7 strict criteria and standards needed to make a landmark. And we've outreached to the Archdiocese of Chicago to ask them to at least consider 12 of these buildings as landmarks, but we were told that they do not want their hands tied. So I think that's a little unfair, and especially when you consider that these are social centers, community centers, food pantries, and they support so many social services. It's tragic.
Thanks, Ward. There's several questions about the churches, people wanting to know how they can help save them, if there's any way to get access to the inside of the churches, and what kind of developers are buying the buildings, and what are some ideas of what works to repurpose them as well. Thanks.
So that's a loaded question with a lot of different answers. Let's go with the easy ones first. Access to these churches during COVID is almost impossible. Those that have closed are probably not available to tour unless you were to contact the Archdiocese. If you're interested in helping with this effort, please reach out to us at Preservation Chicago, either by email or by telephone. As far as development opportunities, we have seen developers come to look at these buildings, repurpose them. Some of them have been repurposed as residential. Others, like the Episcopal Church of the Epiphany at Ashland and Adams, is to open as the Epiphany Center for the Arts. It will hold concerts, all sorts of beautiful programs. Also have a cafe attached to it, and be available for all sorts of amazing cultural events. So that's an opportunity. We could also see these buildings repurposed as places of contemplation, of prayer, a place to escape the workaday world and all of our issues. They don't have to necessarily always be parishes, and there's problems with staffing of these parishes and operation of them. But we've been working with a group of people out east that are very interested in preserving these places of worship as religious centers. We also, many of you might remember the Shrine of Christ the King that was threatened with demolition. It became a landmark, and then 5 years ago it had a terrible fire. One of our great success stories is we were able to raise $650,000 worth of anonymous pledges to keep that open. And ultimately, the Archdiocese of Chicago gave it to the canons of the Institute of Christ the King to repair and operate. And I think what's really important to remember is that the Archdiocese invited this group of religious to Chicago from Wisconsin after the building got landmarked. So I think if there's a will to staff and maintain these buildings, I think there are a lot of creative ways towards that goal.
Thanks, Ward. Here's a question from Alex Bean. Has there been any progress in getting reforms to the city's demolition project process so that some of these buildings can be saved, or should we consider having another historic resources survey done?
I think we should, first of all, hello, Alex. Secondly, I think we should be doing both. We should be looking at a new historic resources, Chicago Historic Resources Survey. And this time, I think we need to get the communities involved, as we've been doing here at Preservation Chicago. We have Mary Lou Seidel, who's offering the questions today, is our Director of Community Engagement. And she has been working with members of the Bronzeville community, also members of the South Chicago community, members of the Woodlawn community, and hopefully starting a program in Edgewater soon as well with the Edgewater Historical Society. And a shout out to Bob Reamer and Leroy Blomert and everybody at the Edgewater Historical Society. Amazing community resources. But yes, we need to update the CHRS with the city and with our residents, and have our residents, our neighborhood residents tell us what they find important and what they find to be of significance and what should maybe be considered for landmark designation. And then, yes, we need to revise our policies here. Chicago was so ahead of the game when the Chicago Historic Resources Survey was being conducted in the 1980s and published in 1996. And we use that now for different means to identify important buildings and landmarks. But a lot has changed in 25 years, and that's from the date of publication. But you know, when you think of when this started, it was 37 years ago. So there are buildings that are very important to us that and important to communities that have been missed. One of them is the Emmett Till and Mamie Till Mobley House that we were very instrumental on working with the community, Naomi Davis and the city to promote and to landmark because of this, you know, huge tragedy that touched so many people, really sparked the civil rights movement, impacted Dr. King and Rosa Parks. And she was recorded as saying that the death of Emmett Till really moved her and led to her actions on that day, you know, on the bus in Montgomery, Alabama. So touching stories that we haven't really focused on before in the past, but to know these legendary figures and to see their homes. We'd very much like to see a district, you know, of musicians, you know, Nat King Cole and Louis Armstrong, Muddy Waters, they all lived in Chicago, and the list goes on. We need to celebrate and honor these entertainers.
Thanks, Ward. And I just wanted to put in a quick plug to please visit preservationchicago.org and consider donating and signing up for our newsletter. Thank you very much. Hallie, I'll put it back to you. Thanks.
That was a little trick. I was muted there. So thank you, Ward and Mary Lou. We got a lot of wonderful comments about what a wonderful speaker you are, Ward, and how important all the work that you do is. So again, we've dropped the link to Preservation Chicago into the chat. So please go over and support the organization. You can find out about how to get the poster. You'll be able to find out how to view a recording of this program. So, and one last thing for the people that we weren't able to answer your questions, they will post the answers or get back to you after the program as well. So I just want to also encourage everyone to go to architecture.org to sign up for some of our future programs, which I mentioned at the beginning of the program. And again, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today, and especially to Ward and Mary Lou for a wonderful presentation and for all of the important work that you do. So have a good afternoon, and we'll see you next year, if not sooner.
Thank you,
Ward,
Hallie.
we'll be set for the last Wednesday in February for our program. It'll be the 20th year. So great. Thank you.
Thank you.